Hello and welcome to the Supernatural Track here at Continual. I'm your host, Gail Z, and today we're going to be talking about the Supernatural finale, how to hold on and let go. And to take us on that journey, we've got some great panelists with us today, and I'm going to ask our panelists to introduce themselves, starting with Lynn.
Hi, I am Dr. Lynn Zubernis. I'm a clinical psychologist and a professor at Westchester University, and my research area is fandom and fan psychology. So I've written a lot of books on that topic, and because Supernatural is my favorite show in the history of ever, a lot of those books focus on Supernatural, and some of them are written with the cast of Supernatural.
Awesome. Janina?
Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Janina Scarlet. I'm a clinical psychologist. I'm a clinical psychologist, author, and a full-time monster hunter. And I specialize in incorporating pop culture into therapy to help folks manage PTSD. I've written books like Supernatural Therapy, which Lynn actually wrote the introduction for and edited as well. Also Harry Potter Therapy, Superhero Therapy, and several others.
Great. And Travis?
I am Dr. Travis Langley, Distinguished Professor of Psychology at Henderson State University, best known as the author of the book Batman and Psychology, A Dark and Stormy Night, the editor and head nerd of the herd on a dozen other books, including Supernatural Psychology, Roads Less Traveled, which Lynn and Janina here both worked on as well.
So we've got exactly the right crew here to talk about dealing with the end of the road. And of course, you know, Supernatural's had its phenomenal 15-year run, a very emotional finale, both a season finale and a series finale. And warning, there'll be spoilers ahead. So if you haven't watched them, better save this video for later. But it really leaves fans with a quandary. How do you say goodbye after all these years? And how can you continue to stay connected to the show that's meant so much to all of us? And I'm going to start with Travis on that.
Starting with me, I have gone through so many stories over the years, stories I've loved and have stayed with me. And of course, you can go say, well, there's always a chance for more, but we can enjoy what there is right now. I could go into the works of Mark Twain. He's not going to write more, but I can still love what's already there. So it's different. It's different from what's ongoing and alive right now. But as I was commenting to Gail when we were talking a moment ago, it's all fiction. So it's all present tense. It's all alive right now. And that is one way to appreciate it. And of course, the actors are still there. The fandom is still there. Obviously, there's plenty of fan fiction out there in the world too. So there are those, of course. And then there is the fact that there are other things to enjoy. How dare you say there are other things to enjoy? But there are other things to enjoy. That doesn't in any way diminish from the things that we've already loved.
I also think that it's important to acknowledge that our feelings are normal and understandable, and there is a grief that is going to come with this, because for many of us, especially for folks that have been on this journey right from the beginning, it was a 15-year-old relationship. And so it feels like a relationship ended, or it feels like someone had died. And psychology actually has a term for this. It's called an ambiguous loss. It's where it feels like someone has died, even if there was no actual death that has occurred. But on the inside, our heart or soul, yeah, it feels like someone has passed away. And the important thing about the ambiguous loss experience is to talk about it, is to make room for this grief, to take time to grieve if we need to really honor these emotions, right? In whichever way you need to. For some people, it means rewatching some of their series, like maybe from the beginning, doing a rewatch, maybe talking to other Supernatural fans. Whichever way you need to grieve is fine, and hopefully not falling into other people's harsh criticism that might tell people that their feelings are not real, because they are.
Yeah, whichever feeling you're having, whether your feeling is having been really brought down because you're dissatisfied with some things there, or you feel joyous, like you celebrate, the fact that these characters each got the outcomes they wanted in life. Either way, anyway, there's more than two ways. Anyway, it's like those are your feelings. That is your emotional reaction. You didn't pick those feelings, and having somebody criticize you for feeling that way, that's their problem.
Yeah, I think it's complicated because there are a number of different things that fans are grieving. Some people are really grieving the fictional characters because over the course of 15 years, these characters became very important to people who've been watching the show for whether they've been watching 15 years or 1 year or 5 years, it doesn't matter. The characters were very important to people. So on the one hand, a lot of people are just grieving what happened to the characters. I mean, giant spoiler alert, but you already gave that warning. Sam and Dean die in the last episode, and Castiel was taken to the empty in episode 18. So the three main characters have all essentially died. And for people who really love and have been inspired by those characters, that is a real loss that they have to grieve. The finale and episode 18, both of those final scenes, all three of them really, were really emotional scenes. And the actors just blew me away. They threw their hearts and souls into those scenes, but that meant we really felt the grief that those characters were experiencing. So that's one whole level of grieving. And then I think the other thing that I've seen a lot of people be worried about, and that I myself worry about too, is knowing that the show still exists and you can go back and rewatch it, but there will be changes to the community of fandom and the way fans interact. We don't have a current canon to interact around. We don't have spoilers coming out. We don't have a new episode to anticipate. Eventually, we won't have conventions to go to. So there will be changes to that community. And if that's been your kind of primary social group where you interact on a daily basis, there's a real fear that that community is going to change and you're going to lose that in some way.
I saw somebody comment about that on a Facebook Supernatural group, that this group is going to dwindle some, however long it takes. It's not going to continue to grow the same way, which I thought that was a little extreme. It's like some of these things grow like crazy after certain stories are over. But yeah, there is going to be some truth. It won't grow in the same way that it has. But even if that person's completely wrong and somehow it grows like crazy beyond that, that is a in their minds, when this is something that's been important enough for them to be part of, that piece of fandom is something they may feel they're losing as well, or potentially losing.
I think it's interesting for a lot of fans that I think have come into Supernatural fandom. This may be the first fandom they've been a part of. And that's where I guess one of the things that I take comfort in, having been part of several fandoms for most of my life, is knowing that there are shows out there that have been off the air for sometimes 20 years or more that still have a dedicated core fandom, still have active Facebook pages, still have active discussions and cosplays, and are still a feature at, maybe they're multi-genre conventions, not dedicated conventions. Everybody doesn't just forget and walk away, even many years after the fact. And that's without the possibility of new official content. So I think for people who have never been part of fandom before and haven't been through this ending process, maybe that's a hopeful thing to know, that there is a long tradition of people continuing to love shows like Firefly long after they're off TV.
And Buffy, there's still Buffy conventions happening, yeah.
Yeah, Supernatural fandom is genuinely different for a lot of reasons. I've never seen any show in which it is such a two-way relationship between everybody putting the show together, cast, production, writers, and others, and the fans. It is so much. It's so lively while the series is going on, and Supernatural has been around, and this is a coincidence of timing. It's been around during the growth and spread of social media. So this has been a powerful thing that Supernatural has spanned while social media has had its big growth in the world.
I found myself even grieving. I mean, this is such a unique experience because the fans did know all aspects of the show, not just the actors, not just the characters. I found myself grieving all of the crew who I know. I mean, many of them I've met in person multiple times, but I follow them on social media, and they felt also like an integral part of the family. And the ones that I follow on social media are, of course, now working on different things. So there's a part of me that's like, oh, look, Jose is working on this project. Isn't that nice? And then immediately being hit by, oh my God, they're all spread all over now. They're all doing different things. That family that was together for so long is not together. And that was like a separate part of the grieving for me.
And not everybody got to be together the same at the very end of the show. At least they got to do their finale, as opposed to some series that got canceled and nobody got to have a wrap party. But some of them would have been spread already during the gap, the plague-related gap in production. And so not everybody would have been there. That we know there are recurring cast members who, like they really wanted a 4 Winchester reunion in that last episode. But because it wasn't exactly worth it, the actors to come and have a 14-day quarantine before shooting a cameo, that did not work out. And so there will be crew members as well who they'd gone on to other jobs and probably were not able to make it for that final family, crew and cast family gathering.
Shockingly, most of I was really afraid of that because I thought with that long shutdown, oh, they're going to lose their crew. They're going to have to shoot the last 2 episodes without their crew family. But actually, like 90% of the crew, they were still there. They all stayed.
Oh, but I feel for that 10%.
Yeah, I know. I'm sure there were a couple people who I'm sure were sad.
Felt for the crew and cast in not getting their wrap party. I mean, that's not something the fans would have been privy to, although I'm sure we would have gotten some photos. But I know from having worked on long projects, that is a well-deserved reward, not only to be able to thank the other people you've worked with, but to kind of feel like you've put a bow on it and ended it right. And for people who have worked so intensely on something for so long, losing that while it was necessary, I'm sure that also feels truncated, just cut off before its time. And I felt bad that they had to give that up.
And without that ritual that's so much a part of grieving. I mean, I feel like fans also, I had planned to watch the final episode in Lawrence, Kansas with a group of about 30 people who are also fans from the beginning, who I've known now for 15 years. We rented a movie theater. We were going to watch together. It was going to be, that's the way you want to do grief, right? With that ritual and those supportive people. And instead, I watched it at home, kicked out the family because I don't want people watching it. I wanted to be able to sob my eyes out, which I did. And then with a Zoom call open with a bunch of those friends, but not really the same. So they missed out on some of their ritual and we missed out on some of ours too.
Let's talk a little more about those rituals because we're seeing them. This is the year that we haven't been able to do those in all parts of our lives, whether those are funerals or weddings or holiday celebrations. And those are definitely ways that we as human beings cope with loss and with major milestones. So if people didn't get to do the ritual that they had planned for watching the finale, what can they do even now, a little bit afterwards, to fill that gap or kind of feel complete? Any suggestions there?
A convention when it's available.
Yeah, and there are some virtual conventions now. I mean, I think Creation Entertainment had a really good idea to hold a couple of conventions virtually. So it felt, I did one of them last weekend, and it just felt really nice to be on a Zoom with Jared and Jensen and Misha and some of the other people to kind of feel a little bit of that connection. And honestly, it also felt really nice to, I did a virtual meet and greet, so there were 15 of us on the Zoom call with whoever. And it was really fun to just sit in that Zoom call for 20 minutes while we waited for Jared or Jensen to get there and to reconnect with fans from all over the world. So that was nice. But I was going to say, I mean, that's literally why we wrote There'll Be Peace When You Are Done, because it's got chapters written by all of the actors and then a lot of the fans. And we were hoping that that would be kind of a, an object of loss or a transition object, so that when you felt like you really wanted to hold on to this, you could literally hold on to the book and hold on to the words of the actors who played your favorite characters. And they're talking about the show and what it means to them and what its legacy is going to be, is kind of hopeful and sort of inspiring. So I hope that the book is helpful to people in their grieving process.
I think attending conventions in that way, in a virtual way until they're open, is so lovely because, yeah, we do get to interact with other people. And also, I think that there are some experiences we can also have privately. For example, even writing a letter that you don't even have to send, right? But writing a letter either to an actor or to a character of the show, or maybe imagining the kind of response that they might write back, can be really encouraging. For example, in working with a number of my clients, I have a lot of clients who love Supernatural, who are also going through grief and loss right now. And that is a common exercise that we do, where, for example, I've had clients write a letter to Dean and then write a letter that they imagine he would write back, something encouraging and supportive. That was my goal in writing Supernatural Therapy, to have something tangential that people would be able to learn mental health skills from, through almost like a hunter's journal, where they can learn how to hunt their own internal monsters. And so I think that this experience can be as global or as intimate as we choose. And maybe even a combination of the two can be helpful, where we can have virtual rewatch parties and also a private experience as well.
Travis, anything to add to that?
Uh, Too much. I actually had so many thoughts at the same time. One of the things I was thinking about, just Janina referring to the journal. I thought of some very nice callbacks in that final episode of the series as a whole. Just them having to dig up Dad's journal like they did so frequently back at the very beginning. I think that the creators did some very smart things without being heavy-handed about it, of giving a sense of the entire journey in what was this simple mission that led to the last half of the episode being what it was. From when Dean's there on the hook, or the spike, whatever it was,
Rebar.
and what?
It's a rebar.
The rebar. It looked a little sharp, unnecessarily sharp at the end for rebar. I mean, when you first see it framed, if you're paying attention, filmmaking, oh, that's gonna be it, isn't it? And Sam and Dean's the one getting thrown that direction. And when Dean's there on the rebar and he's talking, and I'm telling myself, I don't have to start crying now, but you do. And then the entire remainder of the episode, and for a little while afterward as well, because I mean the stuff with Sam right afterwards was really bringing you down. You're worrying about Sam's state of mind as he's leaving the bunker behind, and taking the dog with him, so the dog doesn't get left there by himself if something happens to him. Sam is aware of mortality and this new sense of mortality that they have in the world now. And is he going off to that mission with apparently werewolves planning to die? Because it's like, no, actually it turns out that he didn't need to be by himself in the bunker anymore. Or because it also could have been both, but it worked out where he gets to have his life. and I thought it was just beautifully done. I know there are fans who don't like what happened, but I thought the episode itself was what was needed for the story.
And I thought, I agree with you. I think it was brilliant. And I thought it almost worked on a meta level too. I mean, the whole episode was about grief and loss. It was like a master class in grief and loss. It was so well done. And it was directed, I mean, it was between Sam and Dean. It was between Jared and Jensen. It was between the two of them sort of talking to the fandom and sending that message of always keep fighting and you have to carry on, and really normalizing what grief looks like and how it doesn't go away. You don't forget the person, but you eventually incorporate their memory into your life and you carry on. And then at the end, Sam was looking forward to reuniting with his brother. I just thought, I was shocked at how well done it was, because I certainly have been critical of some of season 15. I don't think all of it has been incredibly well done. So the fact that they pulled off this last episode and made it so deep and so realistic, I was really blown away. And I didn't stop crying for a week.
I thought it was great that I thought it was great that we kind of got the season finale the week before.
Mm-hmm.
And they got to have a much more human story taken away. Some people wanted them to have the big epic finish, but I thought, because these two guys, they got the fates that they personally wanted, and not the fate Chuck was scripting for them, maybe not even the fate fans wanted for them, but it was very definitely the fates they wanted. Dean wanted to die on the job. He would have felt that if he'd gone and tried to live his life happily ever after, he'd have been wasting time he could have spent helping people. Well, we know Sam wanted a happily ever after. They got the fates they wanted, not the fates that were within the story scripted for them. Well, that gets complicated.
Well, and I thought that, I saw some people who were very angry because they had this impression that, yeah, you got rid of Chuck, and then the very next hunt you went out on, Dean died. Well, so much for a happy ending. And when I've watched that part over and over again, and I think there's some ambiguity there that suggests that they had time together between when they beat Chuck and when Dean died, and that they had those years, some period of time together, because there's a shot as Sam is leaving the bunker and Miracle is following him up the steps, and Miracle's struggling on the steps. Mm-hmm. And the first time I saw it, I thought, well, why are they making that poor dog go up the steps if he can't do it? And then I thought, it's because he's old, and he wasn't old before. So Miracle has had time to get old. And so time has passed. And so they did get some time together without Chuck and all the meddling. And I find that incredibly hopeful that it didn't just go from, well, we're free to we're dead. And I hope people can see that and take some comfort from that.
Yeah, I thought the same thing. I mean, I thought that was the point of the montage, to show that, they had been there so long living that life that they had fallen into routines that were established. It seemed very clear to me from that montage that it had been a long time. And I think, from what Travis was saying, I think you're right. Dean, as long as Dean was alive, Dean was going to want to hunt. He felt like that's what he wanted to do. I think Sam came around to that as well. And as long as the two of them were alive together, they wanted to help people and they wanted to keep hunting. But I kind of like that they were quintessentially human. They were never superheroes. They were human. And I think that's what makes their story so inspiring and so compelling. And every single time they went into a hunt, when you're human, you can get impaled on a piece of rebar and die. It's random, it's horrible, it's tragic, but it's very real. And sometimes that's the way loss and tragedy happens to us as humans. So I even found that part to be, hard to watch and really sad, but again, really inspiring because it was so real.
And we know Sam and Eileen had more adventures.
Well, and
I don't know, maybe.
Yeah. And I know that because of the pandemic, we didn't get to have that close-up shot, but it was Eileen, right, that Sam married. And
we don't know. And Jared says they left it ambiguous on purpose because they really didn't want to it's sort of like this fandom wants 8 million different things. Let's give them an ending that's ambiguous enough that if you want to think Sam was with Eileen, you absolutely can do that. If you don't, you absolutely can do that. So you could do whatever. Jared said that could have been, just who knows? It could have been a babysitter. It could have been a co-parent. Sam's sexuality and gender identity is up for grabs. Who knows? Write your own story. Do with it what you will. And I know some people didn't like that, but I really liked that. I think they really tried to make it palatable to all kinds of fans and let fans make of it what they want.
Travis, you look like you're thinking hard there.
I was thinking about a discussion some fans were having. They were trying to figure out if Sam's son, Dean the second, Dean the later, he seemed to some fans to be using sign language during part of the time when they were talking, and I'm not sure. And I hadn't looked up. I haven't rewatched that scene. I have not brought myself to rewatch the episode yet, so I have not rewatched that scene to see if there were signs that they were right. That was among the many fan discussions of whether or not it was Eileen. But no, I think they were right to leave that ambiguous. If you wanted it to be Eileen, it's Eileen. If you didn't want it to be Eileen, it's not Eileen. That hair's too long. Hair grows. But I think that was very well. I thought it was what it needed. But I also understand, and I feel for the people who they were devastated by it. There are people genuinely devastated by it. And I feel for them, the ones who feel like they feel like Dean gave up when he's saying Sam not to leave. Is that Dean's dying within 2 minutes. He doesn't want to be alone because he feels it's right there, even if he's really articulate for those 2 minutes.
But he's a hunter. Sam's a hunter. They know when something is a mortal wound. He didn't give up. He absolutely didn't give up, and Sam didn't give up on him. I've seen that take too, it hurts me to know that that's hurting people, that they took a message from that Dean gave up and wanted to die. No, absolutely he did not. But people do know when they are mortally wounded and they're dying, and Sam and Dean are hunters. They certainly knew that.
Yeah, and nobody's had more practice dying than Dean.
That's true.
And that was another one of those mirrors that they gave us, all the way back to All Hell Breaks Loose, when Dean had put his hand on Sam's back and it came away bloody, and that look on his face that he just knew what he was dealing with. And Sam had that mirrored reaction when he reaches behind Dean and he knows. So no, I don't think that there's giving up there. Not in a world, especially where you can no longer call on an angel or an Nephilim or an archangel to, undo it.
Well, that was something I've been commenting.
That is the consequence.
I've been commenting in the discussions with people online before the episode aired that this adventure, whatever it was going to be, the regular job that they were on, would have to somehow say something about how that world had changed, whether it was that death is death or something else had changed to give them a reason to actually go a different path. The only one I could think of was, well, what if the monsters came back as humans? Then they could find out in that mission, things change. But one way or another, and of course it wasn't going to be the one where they both live happily ever after. But it had to say the world has changed. Death is death, because Jack's taking out all the cheats and not intervening the way Chuck liked to see things happen. And it brings it back to our world. The show started out, the humanity of the characters is what grabbed us. I didn't watch it for 15 years. I didn't start it for about 5 years. It was always this thing that would run after something else I was watching on the CW. But one time I caught this conversation between Sam and Dean, and just the relationship, the interaction between those two. It's like, well, I should go check out that first episode on Netflix. So days later, I've now seen them all. And that humanity of the characters was what grabbed me. And I was so glad it came back to the humanity of the characters at the end.
Mm-hmm.
I agree.
Well, and the show has had... Oh, go ahead.
No, please.
Go ahead, Janina.
I think for so many
I was going
people
to say,
it
the whole theme of free will. You.
okay. And I think for so many people it was also about finding hope when they were facing all kind of tragedies and fighting their own internal monsters, right? Because maybe my I guess interactions with the supernatural community are more skewed just because of my profession, but from what I've seen, there's so many people that report that it felt like they saw themselves on the screen, that it felt like they were able to see somebody else that's also struggling with monsters that maybe only they can see and feel. And whether it's a monster of depression or grief or trauma or substance abuse, it's something that for the longest time they felt alone in that struggle, and then seeing something like a metaphor for their experience reflected on the screen and seeing that there are different ways that you can face this monster. You can learn about this monster. You can read about this monster. You can prepare the salt or some kind of a concoction to face this monster, and that you can bring in other friends and other hunters. I think has allowed so many people to have hope. And so I think for a lot of people, that's why the fandom became a home in which they felt safe to be themselves, to express what they were going through, a home in which they were welcomed and accepted, and they could say and feel anything that they felt.
Yeah. I was going to come back to the idea of free will because, we had team free will and free will 2.0 and the whole idea of breaking free from Chuck's story and his hamster wheel. And it's kind of like adulthood. You fight so hard for your independence to be an adult, and then you are one and you go, holy crap, what was I fighting so hard to get out here to do? Adulting is hard. And I got that feeling also with okay, they're free. Chuck isn't writing their story anymore, but with that freedom then also comes less of a safety net and consequences and responsibilities. And that's just part of growing up. But I think that was something that also kind of came to bear in these last episodes was, it's kind of like losing your immortality. Well, now that you're mortal, you have all these good things, but you're also going to die.
I mean, I agree with Travis. I like that they came back to their essential humanity. The show was in the first early seasons was really scary and really compelling because you always knew that they could die. And it was not at that point a given that, oh, they can die and they're always going to come back. That the stakes were very high when you were watching it in the early episodes, especially I think if you watched it from the beginning as it aired, because you didn't know where they were going to go. And they kind of came back to that in the end. And that made it a lot more emotional and a lot more compelling. It also made it really sad and tragic. But I did think it was ultimately hopeful. I mean, in Sam being able to carry on and, still find happiness. He still missed his brother, but he found happiness. He had a son. He had a relationship, maybe with Eileen, maybe with someone else, but whatever. He had a life, and I think that was hopeful. And then, their reunion in the end, I also thought was really hopeful. Castiel and Jack fixed heaven and made it back to, what it should be, and not that horrifying little you're stuck in a time loop in your own isolated cell, which I was always like, oh my God, if that's what people think heaven is, who wants to go there? But it was back to being a for real heaven. So that was also very hopeful.
One of the moments that got me the most was the simple thing is after we had just seen Sam leaving the bunker, we're worrying about him, and they go to this toddler with Dean on the overalls. And at first, the close up, it could be a flashback. It could be a flashback to when Dean was on. It pulls back and there's Sam, and you just feel like, oh, he got to have a life. Yes, that was just a wonderful moment, and it says these human moments in real life, real people, are powerful to us and powerful to what we see in these fictional characters. You want them to have lives. It's like, of course, plenty of fans wanted them both to have the life, but it said there's a future. Because hey, Sam's still around. Sam's not dying for another 40, 50 years from now. Anyway.
I thought it was really hopeful too in what it had to say about kind of breaking the cycle of intergenerational trauma, because the Winchesters as a family were just mired in this tragedy and passing it down again and again and again. And Sam did not do that. You know, Sam, even just from what we saw of his son, Sam did a really kick ass job of raising a son who was not mired in that, and who, you know, even at that age could tell his father, give his father the permission to let go and to go. And that was something that was, again, so real and so hopeful. And there were so many of those messages. It's almost kind of overwhelming because there's so many things that are in that finale. It is a complex and deep and complicated episode. I'm still in shock that they pulled it off and made it that much. But I really like that theme as well.
Well, that simple thing with wanting the other person to say it's okay.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just about it's yeah, I can go, but I can go knowing that you're carrying on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now, what can we say to, some people were really, really emotionally invested in one ending or another, or one sequence of events or another. And that's always dangerous when you're not the one writing the script or the story, because you don't control what happens. And even though you think all markers point that way, it's somebody else's story and they can go a completely different way. And some folks, the ending, the sadness of the show ending is compounded by the fact that they really thought they knew what was going to happen and they were invested in it, and it didn't. How do you wrap your head around that and find closure or peace with that when there's a sense of disappointment there?
It's a hard question.
Yeah, people who dwell on what did or did not happen in their past, who dwell on this didn't go the way I wanted to. Well, if it didn't go that way, it didn't go that way. That correlates with a higher rate of depression. People with more depression have more counterfactual thinking, dwelling on a whole lot of if only the facts were something other than what they are. They tend to dwell on the past more than the future. Of course, dwelling heavily on the future can be associated with anxiety, but it's either extreme is associated with forms of unhappiness. And it's important for stories to surprise us. It's important for stories to not do exactly what we think they're going to. I had things I thought, oh, it seems like they're setting this up, and they didn't go that way. They did it better than what I'd had in my head. Of course, that could just reflect on me, not what the others wanted to happen. You need to enjoy the journey along the way. And unfortunately, we've got 15 years of episodes of this one with its journey along the way.
I think it's also important to acknowledge what about a particular desired ending was important, right? So for some folks, for example, they wanted to see maybe more of an interaction between Castiel and Dean after Castiel told him that he loves him. And for folks in the LGBT community, that moment was so important. And to have Cass die immediately after and never have a moment together with with Dean, was really hard. And so I think that it's understandable that some folks might feel really let down if their representation wasn't met. And so I think that's where being able to talk about how you're feeling, and whether it's either writing fan fiction or maybe turning to additional stories where there's more depiction of these kind of characters, or maybe even expressing how you feel, because I do think that the way people feel is important, and it makes sense that not everyone is going to feel represented, and that is unfortunate because we are limited to what can be shown in a particular episode. And I personally wish that there was more of an interaction between Dean and Cass. And as an LGBT person, I also wanted to see more interaction between the two of them, and more interaction between Charlie and her partner. So I do think there is validity to some people feeling disappointed in that way. And, I think just being able to process that with somebody that understands can be really helpful.
Some of those will be the limits that were caused by lockdown and some of the actors not being able to come back for appearances. And that is that one of the things, like, people in our lives, very few events in our lives go exactly the way that we'd envisioned or hoped for. And for our own health, we need to focus on what has gone well, what we can learn, and what we can do for the future.
I do think, I mean, Janina, you make a really good point that, when you do
Mhm.
care about something as much as many people cared about Supernatural, when the show comes to an end, it's hard in the first place. Then when the ending is not something that really met your expectations in a way that was personally very important to you, especially if it feels very mixed up with your own identity, that is really hard. And I do think people have to allow themselves to grieve, and they have to allow themselves to be angry. One of the things I loved was that some people who are feeling that way, started a fundraiser to do constructive things to kind of try to help with representation in media or helping the LGBT community or something like that. And that's sort of a constructive way of taking those feelings and feeling good about doing something with them. I also think, the show, nobody thinks the show was perfect. The show wasn't perfect. There's no way it was perfect. And it started in 2005 when things were very, very different. So one of the points of There'll Be Peace When You Are Done, in addition to being like a transition object to help people over the end of the show, was the whole book is an exploration of how Supernatural did deal with representation and how it evolved slowly, frustratingly slowly, I will admit, over the years, but how it did. So there's chapters written by people who are diverse in every way that you can possibly think of, writing about the characters that did provide representation in a whole lot of different ways. And that may not have been the particular representation or the particular characters that you were looking for representation, but certainly some of it was there. And I think that can help a little bit too. I mean, representation is undeniably important in media. So it's important to look at what's there and also give yourself the opportunity to grieve what was not there and what was personally important to you.
As far as the letting go piece, we've seen a lot of fan support for Jared's new Walker and Jensen's new role with the boys. And yet, maybe I'm the only one, but there's part of me that still kind of looks at that and almost feels like they're cheating on Supernatural. Wait, you belong in Supernatural. You're cheating on your best girl here. And it's a long association. Of course, they're actors. They're going to go on to the next project, no matter how special Supernatural was and is to them. How do we celebrate that next step for them while still accepting that maybe it's hard to see them in a new role because it reminds us that they're not in their old role?
I think they're struggling with that too. I mean, they've talked about that. It was very hard for them to, and both of them, even though Jared could have been doing promotion and talking about Walker for a long time, he waited largely until Supernatural was over as a way of honoring Sam Winchester and the way he feels about Sam Winchester. I had a conversation with Jensen, and I can talk about this because now it's been in Entertainment Weekly. But he was talking about going to get a costume fitting for the boys, and they were picking out his boots. And as he looked at the boots that were laid out there, there was a pair that were the exact boots that were Dean's boots, which of course were very personally meaningful to Jensen. They were black, not brown, but he immediately picked those. And I said to him, that is like, first of all, that's very, very Freudian. But second of all, that is such an indication of how for them too, this is a transition. And, he's having to literally step out of Dean's boots and into Soldier Boy's boots, but he doesn't want to leave it completely behind. So what a beautiful sort of metaphor for the fact that you still take with you what you love. It's the same with Sam moving on with Eileen or whoever he was with. He still took his love for his brother with him into the life that he carried on to. That's the way we do it. That's the way we grieve it. So I think in a way, Jared and Jensen are showing us the way that they're doing it too.
So we all need to be Sam. We need to accept that these feelings of loss are part of us and carry on in the other things we're doing.
I think always be Sam is great advice.
Always be Sam. And folks, that's a great note to end us on here. Thank you so much for coming back to revisit this. And I hope we can have more supernatural conversations in the future. But real quickly, please let everybody know where they can find you online. Lynn?
I am on all social media at FangasmSPN, and I have a website, fangasmthebook.com, and the new books that were written with the cast of Supernatural can be found at the website peacewhenyouaredone.com.
Great. Janina?
On Twitter, I'm at Shadow Quill. My website is superhero-therapy.com, and I'm Dr. Janina Scarlet Official on Instagram.
And Travis?
I am at Superherologist on Twitter. Just look for Travis Langley because you'll probably misspell Superherologist. Twitter and Facebook, I'm easy to find. The books are on Amazon and Barnes and Noble and all over the place.
And of course, we're here at Continual, and we'll continue with more Supernatural Fandom Track. So stay tuned. There's a lot more good stuff to come. Thanks so much for joining us.